Hi guys, so today I'm going to be showing you how I created this 3D animated mockup inside Blender. um yeah, it's actually not that difficult. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. I don't have much going on here, just basic shapes and basic camera movements. So this tutorial should be easy to follow along for beginners and also intermediate designers as well, intermediate 3D designers. And before we get started, we did a couple of things. We need the iPhone model. So I got the iPhone model from Sketchfab. This was created by a 3D artist called Wes, and it's free of charge, high res, so you don't need to worry about like low poly or low resolution. So yeah, and you can just download the 3D model into your system. And we also need the HDRI. So the HDRI is what we'll be using to light up our scene. And you need Blender kits, although this is not necessary. But if you want to be like creating more and more environments or more animated mockups like this, you can download it, create an account, and use it to import 3D models or 3D assets basically, right? And they also have HDRIs as well as materials, so you can use that for your 3D creations, 3D artworks. And so I got this stethoscope from Blender Kits. So if you don't want to download Blender Kits, I'm going to drop a link in the description to all the files basically, right? So you can just download them and use them and follow along in the tutorial. So, and you also need Blender as well. So of course you can just go into blender.org and download the latest version. And it's not that heavy, about 300 MB or less, right? So, and yeah, without further ado, let's get started. When you launch Blender, your view might be different from your view is definitely going to be different from what you're seeing right now, so you don't need to panic. It's not a big deal. I just set my workspace to what I'm comfortable with basically, right? So this is what is convenient for me, right? Having my basic solid states here without materials and lights in, and the rendered view down here, and what I have at the top here is just the shaders, the shader editor, right? So that's where I add my materials. And to the right here is the layers panel or the outliner, similar to what you have in Figma, your layers panel, Photoshop as well. And down here is the properties panel, right? So this is where you'll be using this a lot to tweak your model, right? Or your camera, whatever you have here, you'll be tweaking them here. And down here is the timeline, so we're going to be using this as well. And yeah, so let's get started. Let's click outside the splash screen. By default, you would see a cube, a light, and a camera. So what you want to do is you just want to delete all of this. And let me just turn on screencast keys here. So yeah, so I'm going to be using a lot of shortcuts, and some I'll be saying out loud, some I'll just like I'll just use the shortcut without actually saying anything. But you can just take a look at the bottom left of your screen to check out the keys I'm actually pressing on my keyboard. So yeah, without wasting much time, let's start creating our environment. So select everything by hitting A on your keyboard, X, and delete. So you should have a blank 3D world space here. So in the final version, we have the floor, and we have a cube, and we have a background, and we have a lot of, like, we have just basic shapes here, right? So we want to recreate the environment first, right? And let's start with the floor. So to create the floor, we're just going to use a plane, right? So to bring in a plane, Shift A, mesh, plane, and we'll scale it up like so. like this. Yeah, this should be fine. Coming to the front view, right? So I used number pad here. So if your keyboard does not have a number pad, don't worry, you can just use these viewpoints here, right, to navigate. So you have the front and the back, which is the Y and the negative Y axis, the left and right, which is the X and the negative X axis, then top and bottom, which is the Z axis basically, and the negative Z axis. So you can just use that as well. And yeah, so let's go into the front view, and we want to create a 3D view of this, right? Because right now we can't see where our plane is because we need to be placing things on top of it. So we need to know where exactly it is. So let's select this, tab into edit mode, then E to extrude downwards like so. So you should have this. And let's move this above, or we can just leave it here actually. Let's just leave it here. Now let's create the cube that we have here. This 1, 2, 3 cubes. We have a big cube, then we have one acting as a cover, and we have a smaller one here. So let's start with the big cube. To do that, Shift A, mesh, cube. Scale this up on all axes. Go into the front view, then move it on the Z axis, GZ, then make sure it's touching the floor. We don't want to leave any gap, right? So make sure it's touching the floor here. That's fine. And let's just scale it on the Y axis a little bit, and let's move it on the X axis, and let's move it back like this. Let's just move it. So I just went into the top view to just position this cube where I want it to be. So this is fine for me. I might still alter this when I add in the camera, but yeah, this is fine for me basically. Yeah, the next thing we want to do is add a cover here. So there are two ways you can do this. I'm just going to show you this one. So we want to create, the next thing we want to do is create the cover here, right? So to do that, we can just duplicate this cube by hitting Shift D, then Z to move it on the Z axis. Make sure it's touching the bottom cube like this. So we want to reduce the height of this, right? So tab into edit mode, select the face select mode, and select top face, and GZ to move it down on the Z axis. This is fine. Now you notice you're having like a hanging dot here, right? This is basically like the origin point. If you rotate this, you'll notice that you'll see that it's rotating around the origin points, and we don't want this, especially when we're scaling. We want it to scale from the center of the object. So to fix this, just come into objects mode, set origin, just select objects, origin, set origin, then origin to geometry, and you have this here. So it scales properly and it rotates well. So that's fine. Now the next thing we want to do is create this smaller cube here. So to do that, we'll just duplicate this bigger one here, Shift D, Y to move on the Y axis, then make sure go into the right view. These ones don't have to touch each other, just create just a small gap between the two of them. Then tab into edit mode, select the top face, and scale on the Z axis like this. Move on the Z axis like this, and let's increase it just a little bit like this. Yeah, this is fine. Then tab out. Remember what we did, object, set origin. I already have mine added to quick favorite. So to do that, just go to object, set origin, right click. Yours would say add to quick favorite, so just click on that and you already have the action sets your quick favorite. So these are all the actions I actually use all the time. Like majority of the time I use them. So rather than me like looking for where they are hidden, I just hit Q on my keyboard and it brings up the quick favorites and I just apply whatever I need here. So that's that. Now I want to create a background, which is, these are cubes basically, so they look like planks. So we're just going to create this, right? So to do that, we just add a new cube, Shift A, mesh, cube, bring it to the top like this. Then let's scale it on the y-axis, top view. Then scale it on the x-axis like this. Then let's go into front view and let's scale it down just a little bit. And let's bring this to the floor. So you have this here. Now I want to create duplicates of this, right? So to do that, we're going to add an array modifier. So an array modifier just creates duplicates of the object. So we're going to move it to the right, to the left, then Q, or come into the properties window here, click on this blue spanner, then add modifier, search, array, and you have this. So let's give it like 10, right? I think, yeah, 10 should be fine, but we want gaps, right now there are no gaps. We want gaps in between each of them. So we're just going to give this a factor x of 1.02, and we have little gaps here. So let's rotate this RX 90. Then let's go into the right view, GY to move it to the back, GZ to move it to the top. You have this here. So we have our background, we have our environment, 80% done. So we want to create this circle here and also this object here. So these are basically circles. So let's start with this blue one first. So to do that, Shift A, mesh, circle, scale it, go into the top view, then tab into edit mode. Make sure you're in the vertex select mode. So you see these different dots, right? You see dots on your model. So what we want to do now, it doesn't have to be in the vertex select mode actually. So let's just create a face by hitting F. So this adds a face to our circle, right? And let's tab out. Let's bring it up a little bit because that thing is actually, it's overlapping with this floor and it's pretty distracting. So I'm just going to move it up. And I'm going to extrude this, right? So tab into edit mode, EZ. So yeah, Z again, sorry. This should be fine. Yeah, this is okay. Tab out. Now let's remove those jagged edges, right? So we don't want these lines here. So to fix that, right click, shade auto smooth, and it removes that. Sorry, I have a cold, so that's why my voice is a little bit rough. So let's rotate this on the x-axis by 90 degrees. Then let's move this up. Go into the right view, GY, and yeah, I think this is, let's move it on the x-axis just a little bit. Yeah, this is fine. Now let's create this other model here. So it's also a circle, so Shift A, mesh, circle, scale it, Let's bring it up a little bit. Then go into the top view, tab into edit mode, make sure you're in the vertex select mode. So what we want to do is we want to stretch half of this circle on the x-axis. So click and drag over half of the circle, the dots, like this. Select that, then GX to move it on the x-axis, and you have this. Let's extrude this as well. So A to select the whole thing, then E, Z. Yeah. Before we extrude this, sorry, let's create a face first. So F, then extrude on the Z axis. So we have this here. Tab out of edit mode, shade auto smooth, rotate on the X axis by 90 degrees, move it to the top. What do we have for the reference? Okay, it's touching the floor, so let's just make it touch the floor like this, and let's take it to the back. Yeah, for these guys too, we want to move these guys to the back as well, so it's very close to the background. Yeah, and that's sorted. Let's move this on the x-axis so it's centered. The next thing we want to do is bring in our iPhone model. And when you've downloaded your model, what you want to do is go click File, Import, then GLTF 2.0. Select that and go into the folder where you've downloaded the iPhone model into, and just import it. So, and let's just bring this up, make sure it's touching the floor. Yeah, this is fine. And what we want to do now is we want to create a control, right? We want to create an empty that would act as a control for iPhone, right? So because right now they're all separated, so we can't just select it from the 3D viewport, although you can select it from here, but you would also need the control to animate the camera, right, to center the iPhone to your view basically. So because camera is going to be panning, so you understand as when we get to that point. So let's just create an empty. All right, so Shift A, scroll down, empty, plane axis. Right, so let's scale this up and let's move this to the center of the iPhone like this. So you have this. Now I want to parent the whole thing, the whole iPhone, to the empty. Now this might be a little bit tricky, so what I usually do when I have like multiple objects, instead of me going to the outliner and selecting everything, dropping them down, what I do is I select it from here and I hit Shift G and select children. Now once I've selected children, it selects everything for me, right? Then I select the empty last, because I'm trying to parent the iPhone to the empty, so I have to select the empty last. Then hit Ctrl P, object, keep transform, and you have your iPhone parented to the empty here. So when you've done this, you'll notice that in your outliner, everything, like all the objects, like you have a bunch of objects here, right? A list of objects, right? So what you can just do is select everything, right, and click and drag it into the empty, and yeah, there you go, you have everything here. And you can just delete this one here. So you have this here. Let's bring in our stethoscope. So the same process, file, import, GLTF, then stethoscope, and that's this one here. Move it to the right, bring it forward. Let's scale this down a little bit. Now we can leave it. Yeah, we can leave it like this. Just bring it to the front. So we have this here. So our environment is basically done. And let's add our camera. So Shift A, camera. Let's reset the rotation and the location, Alt G and Alt R. To go into your camera view, just hit O on your number pad, and this is what you see, right? So it gets really, you can't see anything basically, right? So what I usually do is, okay, for you might not have this view here, so let me just do this here. Select your camera, hit N on your keyboard. Probably this might be open for you, right? Then go into I think it's, yeah, view, then lock camera to view, right? So now when you're moving, as you're panning around, right, as you're moving around, your camera is also following you. Let's GZ, move it up like so, and let's rotate this on the x-axis like this, and let's bring it down. Let's bring it down like this. Alternatively, let's turn this off. What we can do is we can just zoom out, go into the right orthographic view, GY, bring this like so, and yeah, let's just set this like this. Yeah, and this is what we have. Personally, I don't like seeing what is outside my camera view. I prefer like just focusing on what is in my camera, like what is in view basically. So I have to make outside the camera black. So to do that, select your camera, go into the camera property, scroll down under viewport display, passepartout, set that to 1. So you have this here. Now if you don't have this view here, it's fine. You can always do this on your 3D viewports here, right? So yeah, it's okay. Then let's just set the camera, let's move it back just a little bit. Yeah, so we have this view here. I'm going to switch this to my rendered view so I can see. Yeah, this is fine. And yeah, so what we want to do now is, if you take a look at the reference, we have the camera panning from right to left, right? It's panning from right to left, and the iPhone is still at the center of the screen. Now to do that, that is where the empty comes in, right? So we're going to track the camera to the empty, and to do that, just select the camera, go into constraints in the properties panel, add object constraints. In the third row, select track to. Then under target, click the eyedropper and select the empty. So now if I move the camera, whatever angle, the iPhone is still centered. So that's how you do that. Before we actually do that, before we animate the camera, let's add textures, right? Let's add our HDRI. So to add the HDRI downloaded, just go into the worlds property, which is this globe icon here. Select that. Color, under color, select the yellow dots. It brings up this drop down. In the second row, I guess this is row, right? Yeah, this should be row. It's column. In the second column, select environment texture, right? It becomes pink, right? That's because we haven't set our HDRI. So to do that, to fix this, just click on open, go into the folder where you downloaded your HDRI into. Mine is this, Peppermint. Now this is too bright for me, right? So I'm just going to reduce this to 0.5, the strength. I'll use this to 0.5. And what I like to do, aside altering the strength here, is I go into the render property, scroll down to color management, set the look to medium high contrast, and reduce the exposure. I usually use -1, so yeah, it doesn't feel too bright, right? So the exposure is basically what you have like in the digital camera when you're trying to limit the light that comes into the camera, stuff like that. So And yeah, that's for that. And let's begin to add our texture. So the first texture I want to add is the floor. So if you look at the reference here, the floor is reflective, right? The floor is reflective, and to do that, under the shading panel, the shader editor, or you can just click on shading here. But before we do that, let's save our file, because Blender can be quite funny sometimes. Let's call this medical tutorial. So let's go into the shading tab, and yeah, down here you would have your shader editor. So this is where we are going to be adding our materials, and materials are basically like node based. So to add a new material, just click on new, select the object, make sure the object is selected, then click on new. If you don't have the object selected, it won't work, right? So select the object, click on new, and it brings up these two nodes, right? The principled and the material outputs. So we want to reduce the roughness. Let's do a 0.1 roughness. You can see it's beginning to become reflective. So with 1 roughness, it's not reflective. Then 0.1 roughness, it becomes reflective. And let's increase the metallic just a little bit. Yeah. And that's for that. Pretty simple material. I didn't really do much here. So let's do the same thing for this, but this one is going to be a different color. So reduce the roughness and increase the metallic. So let's use like a little bit of gray. Let's increase the metallic so it's also reflective. Let's increase the metallic a little bit. Yeah. And for this one, the same thing as well. Increase the metallic, use the roughness, but this one is going to be blue. So yeah, I'm using that shade of blue, and we can use the same material with the floor for this guy here. So instead of creating a new one, what you can do is select the object without the material, then hold down shift and select the objects with the material, then Ctrl L and link materials. So basically you can see it's copied the material into this object here, and we also want the same material here as well, and also for this guy here. So we'll select these two, then the floor material last, then Ctrl L again, link materials. And for this one, we're going to be using this material here. So select this one, then the blue object, Ctrl L and link materials. Then we have that. I might actually want to use white for this, so I'm just going to link this one so as well. Yeah, and that's that. Let's go back into our layout view, and you can see it's beginning to look like what we have in our final results, right? So, and what we can do now is let's just alter the position of this guy. Move this to the right. Same thing for this guy. Move this to the right a little bit. So, and you have this white background here. So if you want to make it black, you can just add duplicate the floor, then rotate it on the x-axis by 90 degrees, then move it to the back and remove the material. Or you can just unlink the material by hitting the number here, because if you don't do that, if I change the color of this guy here, it affects whichever material is linked, whichever object is linked to that material. So what you want to do is you want to create a duplicate of this material. So hit the number here and create a new material that only affects this object. So we'll just reduce Yeah, change this to black, and let's move this up. And yeah, that's for that. And now let's bring in our video, right? So whatever video you want, you can import it here. So we're going to select the screen. Make sure you have the screen selected, not the body. So the screen, make sure it's selected. Let's go into our shading tab, our shading window. In your shader editor, you would have this node set up already, right? So where you want to bring in your video is inside this node. So select the folder icon, navigate to where you have your video downloaded. Mine is here, and just bring it in. So you might have something like this. Of course, you would have something like this. To fix this, right, you just tab into edit mode, hit U on your keyboard and unwrap, and it automatically scales everything to the dimensions of the device, because I designed the UI in iPhone 6 dimensions, and this is an iPhone 6 model, so automatically it just resizes everything for me to the exact dimension. So you want to take note of that. Make sure you download a model for your design, right, that corresponds with your design dimensions. And yeah, that's for that. And you would notice that let me go into the layout view, right? You would notice that this screen is so bright, right? It's not very easy on the eye, right? So to fix this, you can just go into the shaders, the shader editor, right? And right now the node is connected to the emission, right? It's connected to emission. That means it's making it so bright. So to fix this, make sure you connect the color to the base color and reduce the strength of this to like a 0.1, or let's do a 0.3. Yeah, so that way it becomes easy to look at, right? Let's do a 0.5. Okay, let's try a 0.4. Yeah, this is fine. Or let's do this and let's reduce the color. Okay, this does not work. I'm just going to check out the specular and reduce the IRR level. Yeah, I think this is fine. Let's try 0.3. Yeah, this is fine for me. Before we animate our camera, sorry, if you play this back, you notice that your video is not playing, right? It's not playing at all. That's because the number of frames is set to 1. So in Blender, we calculate, like, the timeline is calculated in frames. The duration is calculated in frames, not in seconds, like your regular video editing tool. And there's a way you can calculate this, right? So if your video, my video right now is let me just check. So my video is 46 seconds. My output, my frame rate is 24 fps. Now, to get the exact number of frames I need to set this to, what I will do is, let me just open my calculator here. I'm just going to bring this here, right? So what I will do is 46 seconds times 24 fps. That is 1104. So that's the number of frames that I need the length, like the length of the timeline to be, or the number of frames I need for the video to play from beginning to the end. So just set that to 1104 and click on auto refresh, so that way it starts playing. Yeah, and let's animate our camera. So like I mentioned, the camera animates from left to right. So let's move this on the x-axis, GX, like so. And you notice in the render view, you notice you're seeing like this huge space here. So to fix that, what you can do is you can raise the camera up a little bit like this, and yeah, that solves the problem. And there's also this space here, there's this cut here. So to fix that, let's just duplicate this guy here, Shift D, RZ90, and let's move this like so. So you have something like this. Yeah, so let's animate our camera. So of course, to animate things to move from one point to another point, you add keyframes, right? So to add keyframes in Blender, set your camera to the first point. This is the first point I wanted to, this is where I wanted to start animating from, right? So I'm just going to hit K on the keyboard and insert keyframe on location alone, right? Then move forward in time. Let's do like 140. Then let's move this guy on the x-axis to the second point I want. So this is the view I want, the final view I want, like this. Then K on the keyboard, location, insert keyframe in location, and you have this. So this the render view sometimes might take like a long time to lag, of course. So what you want to do is just switch this back to solid view. So to switch back to solid view, just hit Z on your keyboard, then hold Z on your keyboard and just move your mouse to whichever view you want. So mine is solid view, and yeah, this is what we have. If you don't have this window here and you want to view the animation from your camera, just hit 0 on your number pad and it takes you into the camera view. So let's hit play, and yeah, that's what you have. We've created our first scene, similar to what we have in our reference video here. Yeah, so we've kind of replicated this here. So but that zoom that you see happening around here was done in editing, right? It wasn't done in Blender. You can do that in Blender, but it was easier for me to actually do that in post, basically. So yeah, so we've done this here. And to switch to like a different camera, so let's say at the end of this animation you want to switch to like probably a close-up view, probably animating from top to bottom like this, or from bottom to the top. What you can do is we can bring in a new camera, Shift A camera, Alt G, Alt R to reset the location and the rotation. Go into the side view, let's bring this back so we can see it, then rotate it like this. Let's bring it closer. Now Blender right now says our active camera is this guy. And how do we know that? In our camera, in this view, we can see the camera. This camera has a black fill at the top, a black triangle. That's indicating that this is camera that is active, right? This camera that is active. Now, so to switch to a new camera in your outliner, click on the camera icon and it automatically switches to this one here. It makes this guy the active camera. So now you can see in my rendered view here, it has switched to this view here. So same thing we did the other side, increase the passepartout to 1. So right now this is too close to our camera, our iPhone model. So we're just going to move it on the y-axis like this. Let's move it, let's rotate it up take it closer, then bring it. I want it to go from bottom to the top, so bring it down like this. So this is our starting point. Right now, by default, Blender is still recognizing, okay, Blender is saying, okay, this is our active camera, right? But we have not animated it. It's still recognizing the keyframe from the previous camera, right? So now we want to do like a scene 1 to scene 2 transition. To do that, in your timeline, where this particular animation ends for this camera, 140, hit Ctrl B to create a marker, right? Or no, that's not what happens. Sorry. For this guy here, for the camera 001, hit Ctrl B where the first animation ends for the first camera. Hit Ctrl B, and basically we're already saying that, okay, at this point, from this 140 onwards, the active camera should be 001, but we want the first camera to start from frame 0. So the same thing, select the first camera, make it the active camera, hit Ctrl B on frame 0, and there you have it. Then when it gets to frame 140, it switches to the second camera. So probably if I did not explain that well, let me do that again. So right now, we want to tell Blender that, okay, we want to transition from this camera to the second camera. That's what we want. Well, we want to tell Blender that, right? So we want to create that transition. And to do that, make your first camera active, go to frame 0, hit Ctrl B to create a new marker here. So we're telling Blender that from here to here, we want this camera to be active. But once it gets to this particular frame 140, we want to switch to camera 001, or let me rename this to camera 2. So we want to switch to camera 2, and to do that, on frame 140, hit Ctrl B. So we've created another marker here for camera 2. So if we want to create another camera, and let's say we want this one here coming from the top, let's say we want it at frame 220, make it the active camera, right? Then hit Ctrl B, and yeah, we already have this. So now let's animate the camera 2, right? We want this to go from bottom to the top. So what we did for the first camera, K, insert keyframe for location, move forward in time to 220, move the camera up, make sure it's active so you can see what you're doing as well. So GZ like this, insert, let's make sure it's on 220. So move this to the top, make sure it's active, to the top, then insert location. So now we've created a transition, and switch. So that's how you create like different shots within the same environment for your animated mockups. Then let's do for this guy. So you know, when it reaches 220, it switches to the third camera. So that's how you create like different shots basically. So to delete a marker, probably you realize that you don't want the marker anymore. Just click on the marker, X, delete, and yeah, that's how you do it here. And yeah, so that's how you create like an animated mockup inside Blender. And to render this, just go into the outputs, right? So define the resolution you want. These are basically dimensions of the camera. So if you want a square size, you can do that, or you want dribble size 800. What I usually do is I multiply it by 3. So 800 by 600 times 3, I have this here. So, but I like to go with 2000 by 3000. So, and we can set, we don't need this right now. So let's go into our render property. Make sure you're in cycles, not EV. By default, you might be in EV. So I forgot to mention that at the beginning. So make sure you switch to cycles. And if your system has a GPU, you can use a GPU. If it doesn't, you can use a CPU, just that it's going to be slow. But yeah, and so whenever you're rendering animations, you don't need this much samples, right? So I'll just set this to 256, and the noise, yes, I don't want, because right now I have a lot of noise happening here. So if I check the noise for the viewports, you can see how clear it is. It's really clear. Don't worry about the whole pixelation here. It's going to be really clear when you export it. So this is yeah, and that's that. So when you are ready to like export the animation, let's say you want to export an animation, we can set the output location. So just click on under the outputs properties, scroll down to outputs, click on the folder, then define the directory, the path you want to save this. Let's say I want to save this here. Create a new folder, call it animation, double click into it, accept, and you have this here. So I render my animations in PNG. Basically, it's lighter for me. Don't render in FFmpeg video. As tempting as that might sound, it renders in MP4 for you, right, as a single file. But if Blender crashes, you have to start again, and you want to avoid that. So you render them in PNG sequence. So that way, if you have like 250 frames, if Blender crashes at 120, you know that, okay, you don't have to start from the beginning. You can start from frame 121 and yeah, continue your render. And yeah, I'm just going to render a single frame. So to render a single frame, or to render basically, right, an animation, just go to render, then render animation, and it starts rendering it out for you, right? But I'm rendering a single frame, so I'm just going to do render image, and I'm just going to pause the video. So when it's done, I'm going to come back. So welcome back, guys. So that took a while. That's because I did not go through my render settings. I'll probably cover that in another video, in another tutorial. But yeah, so when you have a rendered animation, by default, Blender would save the file, the sequence, to the location you've set here. But if you are rendering a static frame or a still frame, Blender does not automatically save it for you, right? So you have to be the one to save that. So to do that, let's click on image, save as, and let's call this still frame. And yeah, that's it. And in another video, I'm going to show you how I compile my PNG sequence in After Effects. So yeah, that's it for this tutorial. If you enjoyed this tutorial, just like and subscribe. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment section. I'll try my best to answer all of them. And yeah, cheers guys.